story of an audacious fraud. He said that after serving his country in the military, he could no longer use his hands or his feet. He couldn't even get out of bed to work. He collected well over $1 million in disability checks. So what was he doing going roller skating and bungee jumping? And what did he say when he got caught? Here's ABC's David Wright.
They say before you judge someone, walk a mile in their shoes.
I'm numb right now. I deal with tremors constantly.
Or in Dennis Paulsen's case, run a 10K.
He lived a very active lifestyle.
All the while claiming that he was too sick to work.
Not only too sick to work, but too sick to get out of bed most days.
Is it possible to be completely disabled one day and fully active the next? That's the million-dollar question, and then some.
He lived a life that changed depending on who he was around. So when he was around doctors and people that were able to provide him benefits, he gave the impression that he was wheelchair-bound.
There's Paulsen arriving at the VA for a checkup in his wheelchair, but other times on his feet. He appears to be walking just fine. Authorities decided to take a closer look at Paulsen.
They're very hard cases to develop.
That's how investigator Paul Lee got on the case.
You're following him?
Yes, just take out a camera, start filming him as he's shooting pool.
Shooting pool, harmless enough, right?
I mean, is it possible that maybe the symptoms come and go?
He's being paid for 100% loss of use of hands and 100% loss of use of feet, permanently and total.
So the fact that he's walking at all is a sign that
It's consistent with what he had claimed to the VA for his benefit.
The VA doles out $60 billion a year in disability benefits, mostly to veterans wounded in the line of duty. The vast majority of veterans are entitled to those benefits. But complaints of fraud have nearly tripled over the past decade.
How common is a case like this?
All too common, unfortunately.
Come on now!
Like the North Carolina postal worker, whose workman's comp claim was undone by an appearance on The Price is Right. Or the New York City bus driver, who claimed she couldn't drive because of a shoulder injury, caught pounding the drums at a gig. What makes Paulsen's case unusual is that he got away with it for years. By the time the VA finally caught up with him, he'd been scamming the system for 20 years.
By the time he was caught, he defrauded more than $1.6 million from the government, checks that he actually got that he should not have.
1.6 million?
1.6 million.
The biggest piece of evidence against him didn't actually come from surveillance. It came from his then-wife's blog.
There's one thing is absent from the blog, is canes and wheelchairs.
In your line of work, is this a smoking gun?
Yes.
I'm David Wright. Nice to meet you.
Even after he was caught and convicted, Dennis Paulsen agreed to sit down with Nightline while under house arrest to tell his side of the story.
What do you say to the people who see these pictures, who watch those videos, and say this guy is a faker?
I'm not faking anything. I'm trying to fight this disease and try to get some kind of enjoyment out of life when I can.
He says it all started back in 1990. After serving just 2 years in the Navy, he says he started getting symptoms.
I couldn't feel the left side of my face, and I was having chest pains. And I was 19, and I'm like, oh my God, am I having a heart attack?
He went to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and the doctors had bad news.
They gave me a probable diagnosis of MS.
A probable diagnosis?
Probable diagnosis.
What does that mean?
You might have MS.
Paulsen got a second opinion at the National Institutes of Health.
Within 5 minutes of him looking at the results of the Navy, he goes, you definitely have MS.
It was his ticket out of the Navy, a medical retirement, entitling him to 30% of his wages for life, no questions asked. But according to prosecutors, Paulsen did ask questions.
He also researched on the internet the symptoms, and so he knew what to say to the doctors when he went in.
The way the system works, the more disabled you are, the more compensation you receive, because you need more. MS is a degenerative disease affecting the central nervous system. The symptoms tend to get worse over time, and as they do, Paulsen would be entitled to more and more benefits. From 1997 on, Paulsen convinced the VA he was 100% disabled, unable to use his hands or feet, unable to work, unable to walk. But the blog tells a very different story.
I mean, look at these pictures. You seem like a very active father. Here you've got your boy in the swimming pool, on the swing set.
Yep.
Roller skating.
Yep.
Running, playing football.
You see how I'm running? I have drop foot. So when you see I'm not pushing off, I know I'm not pushing off with that foot.
We'll spot you that one. Here you are on the beach, Mr. Muscles.
Yeah, it's not a muscle disease. That's what people don't understand. It's not a muscle disease. It's a neurological disease.
And yet, you can bungee jump. You can play baseball, batting .300. And you ran this Tough Mudder race.
I struggled through that.
That's right. Paulsen actually competed in a Marine Corps Tough Mudder race.
How is it that you could be 100% disabled and run a race like that? I mean, if you're good enough to run that race, surely you're good enough to work.
Every job that I tried, I couldn't do, but I looked healthy enough to do it. I'd go out and work at Lawn Doctor and try to open up the fertilizer bags, and the things would slip out of my hands. But here I am, I look healthy. I always fight this disease. We wouldn't even be discussing this if I went to Afghanistan or Iraq and got my legs blown off and had to wear prosthetics. And then you see people with prosthetics competing at the Invictus Games.
Surely you're not comparing yourself to those folks.
No, that's a disease, that's a problem that you can see, is what I'm saying. You can see that disability. They get looked at as inspiring. They're like, that's great, he's fighting through this. But I get looked at like I'm a fraud because you can't see the disease.
You were never in combat. You didn't even finish one tour of duty.
No.
Why does the military owe you a lifetime of benefits for 100% of your working life when you are fit enough to do all the active things that we can see you doing in those photographs?
Because I'm service connected.
He's not a wounded warrior, he's service connected. At sentencing, the judge ordered Paulsen to pay back the $1.6 million plus a huge fine and serve 41 months behind bars.
And no regrets?
I wish I'd never got diagnosed with MS. I'd give anything not to have this disease.
I believe you. I believe you on that.
But you don't believe me on everything else.
It's tough to. The jury didn't buy it.
The jury,
why should our viewers?
Nobody on that jury has MS. I didn't get a fair trial because I didn't have a jury of my peers on that jury.
What do you mean? The jury should have all had MS?
At least one or two people should have had MS on that jury for me to get a fair ruling.
I think the jury was certainly left with the impression that you were dealt a bad card and you played it for all it was worth.
Not true at all. Not true at all.
The tragic part is there's a good chance that over time his MS will progress to a point that he actually is totally disabled. But having cheated the system, it's not clear he'd be able to collect the benefits he would otherwise be entitled to. I'm David Wright for Nightline in Columbia, South Carolina.